Happy Monday, friends, family, maybe family. My dad could be listening. It's possible. Welcome back to the good old Lions of Liberty podcast. And as I've mentioned a few times now, I recently made a nice little trip across the country, across the southern U.S., got to see a lot of people along the way, including my friend Buck Johnson, a guy who I've gotten to know pretty well over the last couple of years, particularly in the last year or so. We hung out several times in his home of Lockhart, Texas, which we'll hear more about today, as well as in Sayulita, Mexico, back in December. And when I was passing through Buck's area of Texas, he and his wife were kind enough to invite me to their home, let me stay there for the night. And as these things often happen, we ended up having a very late night, very long conversation that, of course, went in many different directions. But one thing we did talk a lot about were a lot of the changes that Buck has undergone in the last couple of years, politically, spiritually, philosophically. We'll get into sort of all of those things in this interview. But that night I said, man, this is a really great conversation. If only this was a podcast. But lo and behold, we have the ability to make it a podcast. So that is exactly what we did. And I'm very excited now to be speaking to the host of the Counterflow podcast, Buck Johnson. Buck, are you ready to roar?
I am. Yeah, let's do this. I'm excited to be here. And I'm glad we're in the same time zone. It makes everything easier.
Yes, oddly enough, even though I'm far on the east coast of Mexico, the part of I do respect it, actually. The part of Mexico I'm in just doesn't change times. They just don't do that. So, it did cause some confusion when the time first changed, and I didn't know that wasn't going to happen. So I was like, wait, why am I at this time? And then other people are in this time, and I'm on the because I'm still classified as Eastern time, but I'm Eastern time Quintana Roo, which is the same as U.S. Central time. So it can be very confusing to try to plan things. So
yeah.
But here we are. We have done it, and before this interview, I decided to do a little tick back, and I listened to when I had you on Lions last back in February of 2021. And I actually said, I mentioned being on lockdown currently at that point in time in February of 2021. So I just, maybe you can tick back the clock just a little bit. We talked about kind of your origin story, so to speak, your Liberty origin story in that episode. That's Lions of Liberty 497, if anyone wants to go check that out. But maybe you can just take us a little more through the last 2 years, more specifically, and what you experienced in and just outside of Austin, Texas. You can talk about your move maybe in there too, compared to what people like myself, let's say in LA, were going through.
Wow, that's the last time I was on. 2021 February.
It feels like a whole different world.
Well, it is.
It is.
Yeah. In Texas, we were locked down in 2020 for 6 weeks, I think. Basically, something like that. At the time, of course, it seemed like it was a long time. Now looking back, that seems like just a short little stint there, because like yourself in California and a lot of our friends elsewhere were locked down for a longer time. That's crazy. You were locked down in 2021?
Apparently, yeah, in February of 2021. They had pretty much rolling lockdowns of some variety for until at least, I think, July of 2021, if you can believe that.
That is nuts. I've refrained a few times from tweeting something along the lines of, actually, you might have said it. I retweeted at some point, but I've been thinking,
I've been saying this stuff.
If you still live in a state that does things like that, at some point you're kind of voting for it. And I know, we diss on voting on what it actually means or if it's effective, but living somewhere, voting with your feet really is effective, I think. And I was reading something from a friend, an acquaintance of mine, that I go to his page when I want to get kind of the blue-pilled boomer leftist take of the day. And he said something along the lines of, just move away if you don't like the politics is such an elitist chicken shit thing to say, and it's not effective, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this person is like in his about 50 and never really had a career of any sort, so he's kind of broke all the time.
I bet if that guy ever talked to a libertarian, he probably might have brought up maybe moving to Somalia, though. It's possible.
Yes, you're right. He is the type that would say something like that. And I found it funny, and I was telling Brittany, my wife, about that, and she immediately goes, well, he should talk to Marc Clair. That's, he did it. And so, yeah, I've refrained from tweeting something along those lines that if you live in a place like that, still you're basically approving of what's going on, because it feels kind of like my old libertarian self throwing something at someone that doesn't seem particularly empathetic. But you did it. And so your story is fascinating, inspiring, and very cool. And so, yeah, I did it essentially because Austin is obviously a blue hellhole within a red state. And at some point over 2020, we just said, we can't be here anymore. This is a disaster. And we moved to a nice little peaceful, happy small town in Lockhart, Texas, here 30 minutes southeast of Austin.
Like right out of a movie, I think I said to you when I was there. I mean, it was like, it felt like the nicest small town you could ever be in, which is really crazy and interesting. I think how different a culture can be so close to, like, say, a blue city. I mean, it's maybe 15, 20 minutes outside of Austin, and it's like you're in a totally different world.
It is. And there's even, people probably listening or watching picture a Texas small town, and you think of horses and guys in cowboy hats and everything. And it looks like, when you said out of a movie, I picture like the Back to the Future, like the town square area. That's kind of what it looks like to me. And there are people here that look like me, if people are watching, covered with tattoos, and some that, like, an old school redneck might look at and go, oh, where are you from, kind of thing. But even and at first, when you see hipsters and stuff, I get worried, like, oh, great, they're bringing that kind of blue city mentality to this small town. But I will have to say, people that I've been skeptical of in person here in Lockhart, where I kind of had this prejudice, oh, they're a leftist or whatever. Many times, I don't know if they are or not. Once we start talking, everyone here is so friendly. I've got the local bar I go to, and it's the kind of thing where I can go on a Sunday afternoon and people introduce themselves. People will buy rounds of shots for everyone at the bar, and you just start talking and interacting in such a friendly community. And it's really kind of exactly what we were hoping to get here. And again, some of the people, I don't know their politics. I can kind of guess on some of them, but it's not what they lead with. They lead with friendliness and, aren't you glad to be in this town? Aren't you glad to be out of where you came from, kind of thing. It's super nice. And it's not like the mask thing doesn't happen here. Sometimes in the grocery stores, and it's interesting. I think I spoke with you about this when you were here, because you said even the culture in Mexico was masky, if the rules, even if the rules didn't dictate that they be. And a lot of the Hispanic people here are masky, and I don't know what kind of cultural thing that entails. I don't get it. But
what an interesting argument for building the wall.
Right. It is.
Keep the masks out.
I mean to ask our friend Carlos this, and I've not yet, but why it seems like, and again, this is just from my outsider perspective, the Hispanic culture seems more masky than non-Hispanics, and I don't understand that. But overall, yeah, and Lockhart's not a mask.
Yeah, just to extrapolate on that, like from my I wouldn't say small sample size. I mean, it's a large number of people sample size, but small in the sense I'm just talking about one country, but I've been in many different parts of Mexico, since I've been here. And I mean, at best, I think in the best case scenario, which is like right now, because they actually have finally relaxed some of the rules here, that gets you like to 30 to 40% masking when they've removed all the rules whatsoever. Even when I was in Mexico City, there was no outdoor mask mandate of any kind. Like a lot of the grocery stores and the buildings were supposed to be masked, but you went outside and nearly everyone was masked. And I'm not really sure what it is, because my wife certainly wasn't like that, but most of her family was too. But it's a different kind of masking. It's more like, it's not the violent like people will not be screaming at you for not wearing a mask,
right?
But it's more like, I think it's something to do with maybe not as much superstition as it is respect for other, like thinking that other people want you to do it and thinking it's the respectful thing to do and just going along to get along. That's kind of like Mexicans are an interesting sort of breed because they are very skeptical of their government. They pretty much, it's just blatantly known that the government is corrupt and that's what it is. But there's also like a very much a let's just go along to get by and worry about our own lives and whatever we got to do. It's no big deal.
Yeah, it's interesting and funny that you said you don't think it's a superstitious thing. That was kind of what I mentally jumped to, like maybe that's what it is. I mean,
it all is on some level.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, the good point. Broadly, of course it is. But yeah, I don't get it. But I suppose I should end up saying I love it here in Lockhart, and the transition from Austin to Lockhart was a very wise move. And if there's people listening that are kind of holding on to some kind of last string of well, I just love the city for this. The rest of it's just a blue hellhole, but I need XYZ. If you can get away I certainly would advise to do so. It was one of the best things I ever did in my life. I can definitely say that for certain. And so, yeah, I would advise people to do that if it's possible at all. And it's probably more possible than you realize.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely city things I like to do in general, and there are things I liked about LA in that aspect. But you can't drive 20 minutes out of LA and find a nice little red, little red Southern type town. That's just not a possibility. But it's interesting what you mentioned there. Like, you don't even necessarily know some of the people's politics, but you just know that they're nice and friendly. And I took when I stayed at your house, I was in the middle of a road trip from LA to Tampa, so I drove all through the southern U.S. and it just I think it came from maybe so long living in Los Angeles, so long living in that bubble that I actually forgot what real people were like, who are not talking about their politics immediately all the time and are not just like wearing it on their sleeve. And it's just a different kind of comfort where maybe we probably do have disagreements on how things should be in the government or what have you, but that's not really what's important, because what's, being a good person and being polite and having that hospitality is a much higher level, of priority than, proving the worth of your politics.
Yes. And well, I assume we're going to discuss this at some point, but if I run for city council here, one of my not phrases, but kind of themes I was thinking about is keep your politics out of Lockhart, because I don't want them here. And I don't mean specifically people I disagree with, but just that attitude of I lead with my politics is not something that fits in well here, luckily, so far.
Right. I'm curious then, when exactly did you move to Lockhart? Was it right in the middle of COVID, or was it?
It was October 2020. We
Okay,
started looking at about the summer of 2020, early June or so, and it took until October to get this place.
So was the COVID stuff sort of a last straw of something you were already kind of considering?
Yes. Yes. A lot of the attitude of the people that we knew in Austin was throughout that time, it was awful. And so many acquaintances and, come from the music world, so many musicians and types like that, subculture types that my wife and I were close with. You started to see this ugliness and this, the stuff that we all saw from progressives throughout 2020 was the demand that you take this, the demand that you do this, the demand that you wear this. It was always, they led with hate all of the time. It was wear the damn mask, like they're demanding that you do something. Stay the fuck home. That all these phrases that were so hateful. Austin was filled with that. And my wife was basically, I was ready to move out of Austin a couple of years ago. It's been a couple of years, but a couple of years prior to the move.
Yeah.
And finally that was the last straw for her. She just said, she owns a salon in Austin, and she said, I can't believe we know so many people that don't want me to make a living. And it kind of hit her. And so once, of course, the wife is ready to go, then it happens.
Indeed. I'm curious how your overall view. I'm sure it had been starting to shift even when we spoke back in February 21, but I think it was in May of 2021 that you had me on your show because you had noticed a shift in the way I was talking about things and the way I was filtering things. And not coincidentally, that's around the same time, because I know I was in the same house in Mexico when I did that debate between Tho and Dave. And I started to... I got in trouble for saying this the other day that, people accuse me or like this is me saying vote GOP when I said that Breaky and Tho I found to be a little more persuasive, but less about what they were doing politically and more about the futility of a certain path and of not taking sort of trying to stay out of this right left conversation. So I'm curious how your views have changed in terms of your view of right and left. I think it was when Thaddeus might have interviewed you that you described yourself kind of like as like a right-wing libertarian. So how did that go for you? Because I'm sure there was a point where you were like I was at one point where you were saying, libertarian is neither right nor left, and we're the third rail or whatever other nonsense like that. So when did that start to shift for you, and how has your view changed on how you would sort of classify your own politics?
That's a good question. When did that shift for me? I suspect it was sometime in Gosh, I suspect maybe just before 2020. You know, I should, and I cringe doing this, and I know you do for your own content sometimes as well. I should go back and start to listen to some of my early episodes and see when I can, if I can find the change.
It's a mind fuck to go back and hear your own progression sometimes.
Gosh, yeah. Caleb on Twitter retweeted a episode of mine with Paul Gottfried the other day, and I hesitated to even retweet it, but I did, and I didn't listen to it. I love Paul Gottfried, so I know that his content was good, and I just thought I don't want to know what I sounded like back then and what kind of questions I was asking someone like Paul Gottfried. But I think instinctively, probably in my mid 30s, and then prior to my 20s, I was kind of a right-leaning libertarian anyway. You know, when my first foray, how do you say that word? Foray into politics, when I was a teenager, was the infamous League of the South that Tom Woods was associated with. People still diss on him for that, and so I certainly think that was
Buck really did found it.
Yeah, and so I understand. That light went out behind me. I understand when
the ghost of Robert E. Lee
was. Did you see that? Right when we bring this subject up, so I understand when Tom defends himself against these ridiculous attacks, because I was in it back then, and it was not a racist organization at all. It was talking about states' rights and secession stuff that I still talk about to this day. So I would say that early on, and then in my 20s, once I moved to Austin. And, you know, you find when you're in your 20s and you have a good career and a lot of time off, and you're a musician and you tour and things like this, some outside influences creep in, and you start to be interested in other things than strictly politics. So while I was a libertarian back then, of course, as we all know, with people with outlets like Reason, it's easier to be accepted by popular culture and the people around you if you use the "I'm neither left nor right." I'm a libertarian. That means we want legal drugs and legal sex work and all of these kind of things.
Especially if you're, in a little bit more of a degenerate phase of your life. So you're kind of hanging out with people that, that element of the pitch appeals to a lot more.
Yes. Hold on. Let me plug this light in real quick.
Yeah, sure.
There we go. Sorry. And so, you're precisely. And I was interested in more degenerate aspects of the culture, and so naturally I was always a libertarian, so I used that aspect of it to at least so people wouldn't hate me, and then in my 30s I started leaning back the other way again, and I've always loved Lou Rockwell and the Mises Institute and Jeff Deist and Paul Gottfried, and so that was always, I felt, the right direction for libertarianism, literally and figuratively. And Hans Hermann Hoppe and that kind of thing. So I think once I was probably, I would guess around a year into my podcast, it's just a guess, I'd have to go back and look, I started embracing that part of my instinct and my personality more so. And then definitely over COVID, the futility of libertarians pretending to be this middle ground that's safe for all sides to jump onto was just not working. If you're trying to do it to gain friends, to gain momentum, to gain political momentum, to gain votes, it just doesn't work. And obviously the COVID moment separated people into different camps. And there was a lot of people that are in the Libertarian Party trying to provide this atmosphere in this camp that is not effective. And so at some point, I think I stopped calling myself a libertarian through 2020, certainly by 2021. And some of it was, I was close with Thaddeus Russell, and he had talked to me saying, don't brand yourself politically with a word like libertarian, because it pigeonholes you and it puts a glass ceiling on what you're doing. So some of it worked out business-wise, if you want to say that, for the podcast. I didn't want to be pigeonholed with that term. And then as time went on, I just didn't feel comfortable branding myself with a political label at all, really. And certainly that one, libertarian, I wasn't comfortable with, because people
Would you
think,
not even say right-wing libertarian then at this point?
no, I wouldn't.
Because that's probably like a 6. I think that was, I'm just going to guess 6 or 7 months ago that I remember hearing you say that. So that's interesting.
Yeah. If someone like, the old gun to the head, just say what you are, that I suppose could work. But I'm just not comfortable using a political label at all really anymore, because with political labels, it always gives your opponent, and if you're going to debate someone or discuss politics with someone, the moment you give yourself the political label, then they automatically have some preconceived notion of where you're coming from. And even if you're trying to get a point across,
you got to play defense. You got to defend yourself against this term the whole time.
Correct. And they have this palette that they're going to color you with. And no matter what you say, if it goes against anything of this preconceived notion, it's not going to fit into this mental image that they've got once you say something like that. And so that's why I would advise people to kind of ditch some of these political labels, because it allows people to put you into a camp that you might not necessarily be in. I don't have a lot in common with Nick Gillespie and Matt Welch and people like that at Reason Magazine. So if someone thinks of those guys as libertarians, and then they look at me, and if I say I'm one as well, it just doesn't make any sense. I don't want to be associated with that, right?
How do you rectify that idea of, not having the label with sort of identifying more with the right than the left? Because that is, in a sense, sort of also putting yourself in a camp of sorts, or maybe that's just a much more broader camp, or would you just even try to avoid that in, say, a normal conversation?
I would try to avoid that in a normal conversation. I would let the way I live, the way I discuss politics or philosophy or religion, I would let that dictate to someone else. If they want to put me in a camp, they can do that from the things I say, do, etc.
All right. Well, philosophy, politics, religion. Maybe we can talk about a few of those things and how they've sort of intersected with the direction that your life has gone since moving to Lockhart. Now, you mentioned the city council thing. Let's put that on the back burner for a minute. We'll leave that for the end. But I want to dig more into something that's interestingly come up with a number of people who I do resonate with, not because of this, but coincidences are interesting. But you have, over the last year or so, become an Orthodox Christian. So maybe you could walk me through how that kind of played out. We talked about this over a number of beverages at your place in Lockhart, but maybe we can get the slightly more sober version, perhaps. But maybe you could first just go back and describe what your history with religion was before that. Were you religious growing up at all, and how did that kind of change as you veered into the degenerate parts of your adulthood?
Mm-hmm. That's important. The background's important, I think, to help paint this journey that I've been on. I hate that word journey, but it is effective, and I use it a lot. So I grew up going to a mega church, and it's a guy that's fairly well known. I know the name John Hagee. A lot of people know that name. He's in San Antonio, Cornerstone Church. It was non-denominational, Protestant, evangelical, and I liked it even when I was a teenager, and I was kind of into subcultures and rebellious lifestyles, if you will, punk rock and whatnot. But it's still, I was involved in things that you wouldn't think someone would like to go to a church. But I did. I always liked John Hagee. He's very emotional. It was literally a Bible thumper. He would scream all the time and hit his Bible. And for a mega church, it was interesting because I saw speaking in tongues in that church many times, and things you wouldn't necessarily think about. And then what
is the speaking in tongues thing really? Like, I've seen some videos of it, but like, what is it? What is it supposed to be? What are you supposed to think is happening? And I guess I'm just curious what you think is happening, if anything, or is it just kind of, or do you think that's kind of like a show?
I'm not qualified to speak on what technically is happening. I do know what they said was happening because I saw it so many times. What the story was that I was told is that the person speaking in the tongues, gets a spiritual possession of sorts, and it's supposed to be from God, and they do their thing. And it is interesting to hear. If no one's ever heard it, maybe look up on YouTube. I assume
these aren't real words, right? Or not words we can know as humans, right? They're just, it's just like,
but as the story goes, someone can. And that person in my church was Pastor John Hagee. So this person would just belt out all this crazy stuff that was speaking in tongues. It would last about a minute or 30 seconds to a minute. And then Pastor Hagee would translate what that person was saying to the rest of us. Again, I'm not qualified to say exactly what was really
He's
going on.
got the universal translator.
I'll let people judge for themselves what they think that entails. So I went to that church. Then in my 20s, living in Austin, I didn't go to any church. In fact, through libertarianism, I would say through left libertarianism, I became an atheist, and I would read atheist writings. Penn Jillette certainly, maybe some of the stuff he was saying directed me towards that kind of thing. He's obviously a famous devout atheist. Devout atheist sounds funny.
Yeah. I mean, it's true though. I mean, he is a devout atheist. He is a like the equivalent of an atheist Bible thumper. He's thumping the atheist Bible. As
is Bill Maher. Interestingly enough, in the last 6 months, Bill Maher defended religious people for the first time I've ever heard him do so.
We've really come full circle.
I know. And anyway, so people like that, I would read atheist writings, listen to atheist people, and I was all in on that. And then 2020 hit, and you start looking around and thinking, maybe there are evil spirits, and if there's evil ones, there must be good ones. And so as I was doing the show, I would interview people like Vin Armani, Cyprian, and our friend Matt Erickson. And the term Orthodox Christianity would come up, here and there, and certainly with those guys. And I just started getting curious, like, I wonder what that is. And it's in my nature. Everything I do, not everything, but many things I do in life, I look for like the pure root of where it started. Musically, I like, when I got into rock and roll, I want to go back to Elvis Presley and Bill Haley and where rock and roll actually started, and then the blues artists before them, and how it developed into what it is and what it started as. You and I love wrestling, and as you have, I'm sure, I would go back and watch like the early days of wrestling and why it became what it is today. And I'd always go back to the root of things. And politically, when as a right-wing conservative, libertarian, whatever you want to call it, I didn't want to vote for Mitt Romney, and Mitt Romney didn't inspire me, or I didn't like look into the past of John McCain and where he gets his ideas from. Right. I know where he got his ideas from. But I looked into Ron Paul because he was like the pure version of what I was getting into. And so I thought, well, I'm interested in Christianity again. I see that there's clearly things that are not just politics at play here in 2020 and 2021. I felt that there was actual evil, real dark evil spirits at work. And so I wanted to get into Christianity, or at least look into it. And a friend of mine who was a Christian kind of would tell me that you should look into church and whatnot. And I was kind of hesitant at first, but finally I was at least pointed in the right direction as far as looking. And then again, Vin Armani was on the show, and Matt Erickson, and they started talking about orthodoxy. And so I thought, what is this all about? And then I start to research a little bit, and you discover, so this is the original church. And it was just, again, in my nature to go back and find the pure original version of something that you're interested in. And that's what orthodoxy was for Christianity since 33 AD. And I can keep going with the story, or do you have a question to enter?
No, you're doing great. Just keep plodding on here.
So after one of my interviews with Vin, I think off air we were talking, and I asked him, maybe it could have been on air, I can't remember. I asked him about a book or two to help me with Orthodox Christianity. And other than the Bible, of course, he said, it's a book that I actually lent you. It's a Seraphim Rose book called God's Revelation to the Human Heart. And so I ordered it immediately from Amazon and got that. And as I'm reading, it was amazing, by the way, if anyone out there is interested in something like Orthodox Christianity, it's a very short book. It's like a lot of you listeners, I understand that you'll know Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. It's very much like that. It's just almost a pamphlet. It was really a book it's a speech that Seraphim Rose gave. I highly recommend it. God's Revelation of the Human Heart. So I got that. And then I got the book Nihilism by Seraphim Rose as well, which really spoke to me. It's amazing. Also highly recommend that book. And as I'm kind of discovering these things, our mutual friend Bobby, who does my ads for me, says, there's an Orthodox church in Lockhart, right? I could not believe that. I couldn't believe, because obviously Orthodox Christianity is not the most widespread version of Christianity out there, certainly in Texas. And sure enough, there's an Orthodox church 5 minutes from my house. I could not believe it. And I would drive by. It's in an alley. So I would drive through this alley and look at it like at least 2 to 3 times a week. And I'd just sit there and look at the door, and I would think, no, I can't go in, because I thought it's such an ancient, beautiful tradition. I didn't want to bring my idiocy in there and disrespecting the traditions that they have or anything like that. Little did I know you can just come in and be yourself. I didn't know that at the time. And so I would just stare at it. And one day, this is another strange, crazy coincidence. Someone who followed me on Twitter and I think listened to my show, certainly listened to Pete's show, reached out to me and said, hey, I heard on Pete's show or something that you live in Lockhart. I would like to invite you to the St. Andrew's Orthodox Church in Lockhart.
Same church you were staring at.
Yeah, this church I was staring at. And this guy was one of the Hoppian types. I know your listeners understand that reference. On Twitter, it was a Hoppa guy. And I'm like, what? This random Hoppa guy reaching out to me on Twitter. I said, that's weird. Yeah, I've been driving by it all the time. And Vin Armani told me to read Seraphim Rose, and I'm doing that as well. And the guy responds with, well, Seraphim Rose is my family's patron saint. And he says he's also, his icon's on the wall at that church, which is not totally common because Father Seraphim Rose isn't technically a saint yet. He is to me. And so he's on the wall there. And he says, it's no coincidence that you're reading Seraphim Rose in Lockhart, Texas, with that church 5 minutes from your house. And then one of the members of the church hears that you live there and invites you. He goes, you got to come in. And so I did. I also wrote Vin. I said, man, what a coincidence. And I explained that story to him. And he's like, this is not a coincidence. This is God calling you in. So we started going there. And I should also tell the audience, I'm not technically an Orthodox Christian. I'm a catechumen in the Orthodox Church, which means you are on the road to being baptized as an Orthodox Christian. And so my wife is as well. Gotcha. So we will be technically Orthodox Christians by this time next year. So that's kind of where that story has led me.
All right, gang. Well, Buck and I share a lot of things in common, and one of those things is a mutual sponsor of ours. That is our pal Carlos and his wife Vanessa. Carlos and Vanessa Ablar, who own the wonderful Paloma Verde CBD, just the finest CBD products you will ever get directly shipped to your home for free as well. Because if you use our discount code ROAR at checkout, you will get 20% off your order and free shipping for all orders over $75. So if you're enjoying this conversation, boy, you should really support a guy who's been sponsoring both of us for quite a while now. Carlos and Vanessa Ablar. Check them out at palomaverdecbd.com. Don't forget to use discount code ROAR at checkout. Cool. So I'm curious, like how did the path go from, all right, I've been brought into this church, I see the signs, maybe I got some chills on my spine with some of this stuff, and like how has actually being involved in the Orthodox Church changed your view of Christianity, of spirituality? I mean, what are maybe even some of the parallels, but also some of the how it contrasts with, let's see, for example, the megachurch you grew up attending, okay, and seeing the tongues and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So as I speak on this, just for everyone listening, this is my story and my interpretation of certain things, and I am not speaking for Orthodox Christians or Orthodox Christianity by any means. This is just a young catechumen in the Orthodox Church who grew up Protestant and evangelical. This is my little kind of my lens looking through this. So there's also an organization called Death to the World, and I would advise people who are curious about this to look into that too. And it was founded by a guy named Justin Marlar, who I now am friends with. Interestingly enough, now lives just 30 minutes away. And actually, he lives in Waco now. But however, he started an organization called Death to the World. Like I mentioned earlier, I come from a subculture punk rock scene. The Death to the World thing was started by Justin, who was in a metal band called Sleep. It's actually very famous now. And he was in the punk rock scene in the Bay Area. He was living with the guys from Green Day in a warehouse and the guys from Rancid. And he was going through some of the mental issues that punk rockers go through, and the spirit of nihilism that Father Seraphim Rose writes about was certainly surrounding him. And one day he met a nun, and an Orthodox nun, and started looking into the Orthodox Church. So he became an Orthodox Christian, and he thought, you know what would appeal to a lot of the people, the scene that I came from, is this punk rock aesthetic. We used to have these things called zines. Maximum Rock and Roll was a zine a long time ago, and it's basically like a do-it-yourself magazine. Everything's on black and white copied print, and punk rockers would distribute these zines at punk shows, and it would have, where you can order tapes, and that's how long ago this was, and stuff for punk bands. And so he said, I want to do this for from an Orthodox perspective, and write about the saints and the church fathers and the Bible, and make it look like a punk rock zine. So he started doing that, and it started bringing all of these punk rock kids into Orthodox Christianity. Well, later Justin Marlar became a nun, a monk, and so he basically went from punk to monk, and he became
a hell of a biography title.
It is, and he will be. No one else listening out there is going to get him on your show. He's going to be on mine at some point. He and I are talking about this, and so anyway, he basically put this organization together that's still running to this day. He's not involved with Death to the World anymore. It's Father John Valadez is, and also, no one listening out there, get him on your show. He's going to be on mine. And so the stuff that they put out is very Orthodox Christian in nature, but the aesthetics have kind of a punk rock look to it. And so I found that very appealing. And a lot of their stuff talks about Father Seraphim Rose as well, and the spirit of nihilism. Also, that spoke to me. Again, that book, Nihilism, I highly recommend. And so I started looking into Death to the World, and their perspective matched mine. They come from this subculture scene and Protestantism, and they felt that Protestantism was flimsy. And this is not, if for the Protestants out there, if that's what speaks to you, that's what speaks to you. This was just for me personally, and from a lot of these guys that were writing in Death to the World. It felt false and flimsy and empty, and it left kind of a longing for something deeper and more real and more raw. And that's what Orthodox Christianity was to those guys. That's what it is to me. And so the guys from Death to the World, I owe a lot to, because their material spoke to me, and it made me look further into Orthodox Christianity. And I find it to be much richer, much more beautiful. And I think it's telling alone that, like I said, I'm a catechumen, and before you get baptized, some people are catechumens for 3 years. I don't think I will be, but just there's so much tradition and history and things. Obviously, there's a lot of history. This is the original church. And so they want you to learn about the original Christianity. And it's not just come into this big church and do communion once a month or whatever. And the Protestants look at communion as like a representative of the blood of Christ and the flesh of Christ. And the Orthodox Christians, it's not a representation of the blood and flesh of Christ. It is that. And that's what you're partaking in. In fact, until you're baptized, you can't partake in it, because it can harm your soul, because you are experiencing the actual flesh and blood of Christ. It's not a representation of it. And that blows people's minds. And the Western mindset is, well, let me investigate this and break it down under a microscope. That can't be real. Well, that's not. We look at this through an Eastern mindset. It's a mystery of the church, and it is what it is. And so
maybe that is a good place to dig in just a little deeper, because I think that, like, saying something like that is both like what's appealing about it in some ways. It's like, whoa, that's totally, you don't hear that normally from other religion, from from other aspects of Christianity. At the same time, I think it's something that people of a more atheist bent might just stop you in your tracks and be like, okay, hold on a second here. What are you talking about? What do you mean it's the actual blood and body of Christ? But what does that really mean? I mean, because I'm trying to wrap my own head around it.
I am too. It's a mystery of the church, and
Okay.
I don't want to speak out of my lane, if that makes sense.
Sure. Because you are in the process of trying to understand this yourself.
Correct. And I don't want to put any terms upon it that lead people to think that it's something it's not. The way I said it is the way I can say it best at this point in my journey, and that's how I understand it. It's a mystery of the church. There's a lot of things. You can look up videos on Orthodox priests preparing for the Eucharist. It's called the communion is called the Eucharist, and it will explain a lot of these things for anyone out there who's curious on how this comes about and how it works. It's really it's a mystery of the church, but it's really beautiful as well.
So is it safe to say, I mean, is catechumen basically being like a pledge in a fraternity? Like you're trying to become a part of it, but you have some things you have to do first, essentially?
That's right. Yeah. And you get a sponsor. The gentleman, the lovely, awesome gentleman that reached out to me on Twitter is my sponsor. His wife is my wife's sponsor. And they help you along through your catechumen trial, if you want to call it, or your learning period. Of course, the priest of the church helps you out anytime. I mean, he's amazing. Anytime I have a question, I can always ask him as well. But yeah, your sponsors kind of guide you through this process and explain things to you. And there's so much to learn. And I think that's a good thing. People like you and me, when you get into something, you didn't jump into libertarianism and not read the books on it. You just, and so sure. I find that aspect of it really awesome. And like the original church fathers, if anyone's into philosophy, the church fathers, the things that they're writing about, it's just brilliant. It's mind blowing. And so that aspect of it for me personally is very appealing. Someone like my wife, who's busy running 2 businesses, doesn't have time to sit home and nerd out through books like I do. So you don't have to do that. That's not something that's like required, but it's certainly an aspect that is available, and I find it extremely appealing.
Do you have a little bit of like what I think a lot of us went through when we first find libertarianism and we, read Anatomy of the State or something, where you kind of get mind blownism and you just have to learn everything now because you keep hitting these points of revelation and revelation, and it's just like now you're on this new path now?
Yes, 100%. I've thought about that a lot, and the biggest difference is that with libertarianism, I had that feeling, and you want to spread like, these people are just wrong. They just don't understand. If they just read this book, they would get it. And overall, some things within libertarianism are important and do affect your life. But a lot of the stuff was for those of us who really got into it, the fringe elements of it. It's kind of LARPing, mental masturbation to an extent. But the stuff that I'm reading with Orthodox Christianity, it's about the most important thing of all time. And so it's not just that I'm reading it going, this is so amazing. What a neat concept. It's that this is so amazing. And this is how life happens, how things work, how the universe operates, if that makes any sense. And so, yeah, it's like you're learning all these cool things, but it's about the most important thing of all time as well. And so, yeah, it's a rich tradition. And it's certainly, I'm like a mental midget, compared to how many of these other people are that really know these things. But it's amazing. I mean, it's book after book just on my, for those people.
You're doing it. You're reading the Rothbards and the Mises, and it's the same thing. And it's really interesting. And I think I find it really fascinating that a number of people, like I mentioned earlier, that I have been drawn to, not because they were talking about Orthodox Christianity, happen to also be Orthodox Christians, the people that are like leaning towards that way. And I think a lot of it, I think it just goes back to what you were saying about how you started to see the world differently. And like at some point, it stops being funny to joke about people being demonically possessed, because at some point you start saying, well, that actually explains what I see in reality so much better than anything else, really, because at some point the only thing that can sort of explain what we're seeing in the world and the ways people react is, now I'm not disregarding anybody who might be well versed in psyche, so mass formation psychosis and this sort of thing, and I'm sure there are, I don't know, a sort of scientific explanations, I guess, for the ways a lot of people react. But if you're just describing reality and describing as you see it, can you really would you really know the difference if there was an actual demonic possession or if people were just acting crazy in mass, like we have seen them do, in recent years?
Yeah, it's like the whole, they might not be demonically possessed, but if they were, it would certainly look a lot like this. You can only, for me, I could only tell myself that so many times before you think they're, I'm just over 2020. It just was so apparent that there was evil at work, and it's not just someone with a mean attitude or someone with a controlling, authoritative nature. It's people that was evil spirits working through people. I have no doubt you wouldn't close a church and leave open a Walmart if you're just trying to protect people. It makes no sense. And so, yeah, if there's evil spirits at work, you'd have to, for me, think, well, there must be good spirits also to counter this. And then when I started looking further down the rabbit hole, it led me to the original church.
Fascinating. Well, I think we'll leave it there for now, because you're learning too. But I just wanted to kind of get a glimpse into, I guess, what your own process has been on that end. But I think part of you becoming a part of this church, I mean, you and I went to that bar you mentioned, and I certainly noticed it. I mean, you're sort of becoming someone that people know in town. You're an active member of the church. You're an active member of the community. And as you kind of referenced earlier, there has been talk, it's been mentioned on several podcasts and such, that, and you've mentioned it to me as well, that you are strongly considering, I think it's safe to say at this point, running for city council there in Lockhart. So maybe you could just speak to what has driven you to really consider this idea so strongly. I mean, I think you told me off air, like, you're 90-10, so you're pretty close to being sure you're going to do it, but you're not officially announcing. But I just want to see what your thought process is along those lines, and kind of how much you see that tied into the connection with the community that you've been building more so since you moved to Lockhart, since you became a member of the church.
Yeah, that's a good way to intro it, because one of the things in Orthodoxy is the embrace of community and love and whatnot. In my church throughout 2020, of course, I was not a member yet, but they were the only church that stayed open. All of the other churches closed, and they didn't just do that. They didn't do it at all for bragging rights or to say, like, look how hardcore we are. They did it throughout 2020 or 2021. I can't remember which year we had the infamous freeze that happened in the state of Texas, where all of these people lost power. They were the only ones open during that. And there was a line down the block. They were feeding people. They were housing people. They were being godlike in their community, which is what you're supposed to do. It's what you're called to do. And so the community aspect of our church is something that they push. And then the community of Lockhart itself is something, like I mentioned earlier, that you just feel being here. People jokingly call it the heart, Lockhart. And it feels like a close-knit, warm community. And so one of the things I've considered is running for city council and how I could help the community. And I wouldn't even approach this by saying, I'm going to be on the city council and I will make Lockhart libertarian. It's nothing like that. It's how I could actually help the community. And if I could have some say and maybe pushing things in a positive direction for Lockhart, I would love to do that. I would certainly love to keep it a loving, feeling, a happy community, and not the evil political hellhole that Austin is now at this point. I would prefer Lockhart to take a different route. And if I can help navigate the route, navigate the way we do things in the city, I think I'd like to do that. Certainly running for city council is a bit of an undertaking. So I'm looking at the details behind what you have to do, what everything entails, the meetings, etc., who I would be running against, how that's going to work, the logistics behind all of this stuff. That's not my strong suit by any means. And so I might need some people to help me out there. So that's the kind of where I'm at with this at this point. And it certainly sounds, when you, the mayor the other night, I went to see a local band at the local bar I go to. The mayor introduced them on stage.
Oh,
And
wow,
it's
really?
it's that kind of feeling here. And I really like that. And again, I don't know the mayor's politics. Don't know. He's an old Southern white guy. Maybe that means he's conservative, but maybe he's not. He's introducing a band covered with tattoos. Maybe
Right.
he's not. I don't know. But I find that appealing. And so if we can kind of keep this city feeling like a happy community free of outside hateful, evil politics, if I can help at all, I'd be up for it, I think.
What does a city councilman actually do? Because I really have no idea, to be honest.
So they certainly attend monthly meetings, which aren't it's not the most fun thing. They deal with some of the tedious tasks that most people don't really want to get involved with. And it's basically, city business. There's a beautification. They're working on making the square this beautification program they've got going. So approving certain aspects of, well, we want this road here, we want this parking lot here, that kind of thing. A lot of it's boring stuff like that.
But fuck, shouldn't private companies be doing all that?
Well, they're not. That's the problem. And so until that happens, I would rather not talk about Ancapistan, but I'd rather work in the system that we have as it is and try to do the best I can to make things clean, happy, peaceful, and a loving community, if at all possible, and to keep the hate out. Certainly if masks were to ever be a thing again, I would make sure that if I were on city council, that I would do everything I could to fight anything like that, of course, or shutdowns, whatnot. But who knows where we're at in that world.
I'm kind of curious too, like when it comes to this sort of conversation, like I jokingly said, shouldn't the private companies do that? But the kind of pushback I thought I would probably ask you more about is the pushback you would get from people in the music industry and how they've seen your progression over the last couple of years and how your podcast but has kind of changed and their view of you, if at all. But I guess what might be more interesting is like the reaction that you get from the more libertarian types or the anarchist types when they find out that you are a fireman, so therefore you work for the state, or that you have these plans to run for city council. Does that rub any of your like more libertarian groups the wrong way at all? Is this something you have to defend yourself against?
It's interesting. If it does, I've not been told that. They haven't said it to me. In fact, when I first started the podcast,
well, I wouldn't say anything like that to you. I mean, come on.
Right.
Look at you.
Yeah. I remember telling someone that I interviewed who was working for Tom Woods at the time. I told him, I don't tell anyone that I'm a firefighter because I'm afraid that they're not going to like me because that's not pure libertarian. And he said, dude, we have much bigger battles to fight than the fire department being part of the government. And most of the time people have found that out, that I work for the fire department, that are libertarian. They always say, well, in a ANCAP society, we would have a fire department, we would just pay for it in a different way. So it makes sense. And Rothbard always said, if you're going to work for the state, if it's something that would be existing without the state, then it's valid. And I mean, the bigger picture is if someone said it's not a valid job, I don't really care that they think that. That's fine. But yeah, and the city council thing, no one said anything negative yet. In fact, I think I've had positive reaction. Dave Smith jokingly said that he would do a mail-in ballot for me. He would vote yes, or vote for me for city council by mail-in ballot, because that's apparently all good with everyone now. And
yeah,
so,
he can just have his address at your house in Lockhart.
Yeah, there you go.
Be your roommate.
So yeah, people have been nothing but supportive and nothing but saying you should do it, you should do it, you should do it. So far, I've not run into any negative reactions from libertarians. And to what you referenced earlier, the people in my past music scene, they do think negative things. I know that for a fact about my politics, and I do hear whispers here and there from other people. It's all of the names and derogatory name calling that we all get from the people on the left. It's that stuff.
What about within the fire department yourself? I imagine like at least a number of your coworkers must at least be aware that you have this podcast and that you have a sort of a political thing going on. Is politics something you end up talking at all at the firehouse, or is that something you guys kind of just keep to the side?
I tried to avoid it at work because I'm a boss at work. I'm an officer, and so some of the people work for me, and I don't want to come across like, well, I'm the boss and here's my politics, and if you disagree with me, you're a bad employee under me, kind of thing. Not that they would think that, but I try to lead by example at work and make the work environment fun, and we do training and working out. And so I try not to bring my politics into the job. They all know the podcast. Some of them listen here and there. And some of them will have questions. It's nice, hey, what do you think about XYZ? And I'm at the point in my life now where if someone disagrees with me, and you libertarians out there try to reach this point, it's healthy, I promise. But if someone disagrees with me, I don't have to shove my ideas down their throat and, bash them.
I don't have to hand them human action immediately.
Correct. And it's okay if they disagree with me. We all see things differently, and I'm totally okay with that. It doesn't mean this person's an idiot or that I'm more well-read than them. It's just that we have a different perspective on life. And if they trust CNN and the New York Times to give them their information, it's fine with me.
It's sort of you might say sort of a Christian way to look at things, I guess. A turn the other cheek kind of thing. But I have found that as well in my own life, as I've certainly become more radicalized politically. I think it's pretty safe to say it's interesting because at the same time, I think I'm personally becoming less radicalized in how I interact with other people even when politics comes up. But my own politics are actually like way far from probably, where they might have been, before all this COVID stuff, you might say.
Yeah, certainly. I think my own politics and religious views are probably much more radical than the average person on the street, but I'm okay with that now. And unless they're coming at me with some type of hate or evil, again, the forced, if they're forcing me to do things that I certainly don't believe are kosher to do, that I would have a problem with that, and we can discuss that. But in general, if someone says, well, I got the jab because I just thought it's just best for me. Okay, fine. Don't make me get it. But if that's your reasoning, more power to you.
Indeed. Well, I think we'll wrap up there, Buck. But why don't you just let everybody know what's going on with Counterflow? What do you got coming up? What's been going on with everything with the podcast? And of course, everyone's got to keep those ears tuned, keep their eyes peeled to see if you do make that city council announcement.
They do, yeah. Keep your ears and eyes peeled. So what's going on with the Counterflow? I believe, Marc, if this episode that we're recording right now is dropping next Monday.
It will.
All right, everyone. When you listen to this tomorrow, my episode drops with Pete Quinones. So stay tuned for that one. It's going to be a good one. Pete's been headed into an interesting direction as well. We're going to discuss some of his changes and what he's seen and learned over the last couple of years. And with Counterflow, that's the newest thing we got. Subscribe to the YouTube page. Go to YouTube, search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. You go to counterflowpodcast.com, and you all know how to find podcasts. It's Counterflow.
Have you gotten YouTube strikes on any of your shows?
One, only one, and it was with Jeremy Hammond, and we were discussing the COVID
stuff.
Yeah, and I can't even remember what he said, but some strike on.
Probably better you don't, because then it'll get this one.
I won't say it. And recently, I got a weird copyright infringement thing from one of my the ads I put out, the music on it, and so I had to change the music. It was a weird thing. It said, "We're not going to strike this or take it down, but the person who owns the copyright is monitoring it."
Oh, yeah, we get those whenever Brian does like a music parody on his show and uses an original music track. We get the same thing, but it doesn't actually. It's not a strike. It's weird. They just tell you, and then they're like, you could not change it if you want. But it's a weird one.
It creeped me out, so I sent a new music background to my producer for this next episode. But yeah, it was strange. And I thought, I mean, it happened within minutes of it dropping on YouTube. They must have some algorithm that searches their, I don't know how they do that. It's beyond me, but it's a mystery, like the Eucharist.
Indeed. All right. Oh, well, that will be edited. My cough will be edited out of the non-live version. Only the patrons get the cough. Hopefully Justin will catch that. But anyway, Buck, thanks so much for coming on, man. It's been great talking about all the, I guess, I know we didn't want to use the term, but the journey that you've been on these last couple of years.
Thanks, Mark. And I'm always inspired by your journey as well. And I'm always happy to talk to you.
Well, thank you. We shall do so again. Keep up the great work, man. Keep on roaring.
All right.
All right, gang. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Buck Johnson, someone who, like myself, has undergone sort of quite a bit of a transformation, a journey, if you will, over the last couple of years, both in how his political philosophy and spirituality have evolved since then. So I was glad I could have Buck on to talk about that. Don't forget to support our mutual sponsor, Paloma Verde CBD. Use discount code ROAR to get 20% off that order. Don't forget to subscribe to the entire Lions of Liberty network for quite a variety of shows that you find here. You got me every Monday. You got Brian McWilliams with Mean Age Daydream on Wednesdays. John Odermatt with Finding Freedom every single Thursday. You can get them all on the Lions of Liberty network feed. You can subscribe individually to our shows. Lions of Liberty with Marc Clair, how you can find just this particular feed. I also, in that feed, posted my conversation with Tyler Ianchi of Libertarian Podcast Review that I had last week. It was his response to my response to my, whatever. It was a response to a response to a response to a response. But I'll let you guys go ahead and check that out. If you're listening in the Lions of Liberty with Marc Clair feed, it should be the last podcast sitting in there waiting for you. And while you're there, a 5-star rating and a fantastic review would do wonders. Of course, check out, I've been getting a lot of new Substack subscribers, even though I have not written in over a month now. So I do plan to get back to that. But if you want to be ready, if you want to be there waiting by the phone or waiting by your email inbox, I guess you should say, check out my Substack, markclair.substack.com. That is all I've got, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time.
Live long and live free and live free and live free and live free.